What happens when Hollywood's kindest man steps into the lion's den? Keanu Reeves knew the talk show host was ruthless, infamous for humiliating his guests on live TV. Yet, instead of backing down, Keanu accepted the invitation with one vow. What unfolded next left millions in silence and changed everything. Before we dive into this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring tale you won't want to miss. The air was still that morning as Keanu Reeves sat on the wooden steps of his porch, cradling a warm mug of coffee. It was the kind of quiet morning he cherished. No alarms, no sets, no red carpets, just the distant sound of birds and the rustle of trees swaying in the breeze. For once, life felt like a pause. His latest film, an emotionally charged action drama, had just opened to rave reviews. Critics hailed it as his most powerful performance in years, and fans flooded theaters, some watching it twice in the same weekend. The internet buzzed with praise, and his team was already discussing award campaigns. But Keanu had never cared much for that. What moved him most was knowing the story had touched people. He had just returned from a short trip to Tokyo, where a fan had waited outside his hotel for hours to hand him a sketch she had made of him cradling a child in a burning building, a key scene from the film. Her eyes had welled up when he took it from her hands and simply said, "Thank you." That image lingered in his mind, a reminder of why he continued to do this. Now, with a few days of stillness before the next press wave, Keanu welcomed the silence like an old friend. He reached for his phone to check the weather but noticed a new email at the top of his inbox. His assistant had forwarded it late the night before. The subject line was direct: "Invitation to the Victor Langston show." Keanu stared at the name. It didn't surprise him. Whenever one of his movies blew up, talk shows lined up for a piece of the wave. But this one was different. Victor Langston, the name had become almost mythical in Hollywood circles. Host of one of the highest-rated late-night programs on television, Victor was known for his razor-sharp humor and brutal takedowns of guests. He didn't interview, he dissected. Many celebrities went on his show once and never again. Keanu tapped the email open. "Dear Mr. Reeves, we would be honored to welcome you to the Victor Langston show for a featured guest segment next week. The nation is buzzing about your new film, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in your own words. Please let us know your availability." There were no red flags in the wording. In fact, it was almost too polite. That's what made it feel off. It read like a form letter with silk gloves masking steel claws underneath. Keanu set the phone down, exhaled slowly, and stared out over his garden. The invitation wasn't unexpected, but it wasn't easy either. He knew exactly what he'd be walking into, and yet he wasn't sure if he wanted to walk away. Later that afternoon, Keanu met with his team at his home. His longtime agent, Tessa, sat across from him at the kitchen table, arms folded and eyes narrowed as she read the email again. She didn't hide her concern. "I'm just saying," she began, "there are better ways to promote the film than walking into Victor Langston's lion's den." Keanu gave her a half-smile. "You think it's a trap." "I know it's a trap," she said, setting her phone down. "You've seen what he does to people. The jokes aren't just jokes, Keanu. He picks at scars, real ones. Last month, he made a pop star cry on air." Another team member chimed in. "It could be good exposure if he plays nice." Keanu turned to the window, letting their voices drift behind him. Outside, sunlight spilled over his backyard, dappled through branches that waved gently in the wind. He watched a squirrel dart across the fence and disappear into the hedges. He remembered an old friend once telling him, "Your strength is quiet, but it's real." He'd never forgotten that, and as strange as it sounded, he felt like this might be a moment to test it. He turned back to the table. "What if I go?" he said quietly. "What if I go and I don't play his game?" Tessa looked up sharply. "Keanu, I won't lash out. I won't play the victim, but I won't back down either." He met her eyes. If he wants a spectacle, he won't get one. But maybe, just maybe, people will see there's another way. They all sat in silence. It wasn't a rejection of their concern. It was a choice, a calm one Keanu had made peace with. Fame had taught him long ago that staying silent wasn't always strength, but knowing when to speak and how, that mattered. Tessa sighed and leaned back in her chair. Then let's make sure you're not walking in there blind. Keanu nodded. That night, alone again, he sat on a stone bench in his garden. The stars had come out, glittering above the dark silhouettes of trees. The email was still fresh in his mind, but he wasn't thinking about the show. He was thinking about character, about what it meant to sit across from someone who might try to tear you down and not flinch. He pulled a folded note from his pocket. It was old, creased at the edges, written in faded black ink. A message from someone he had once trusted deeply. Hold your peace. It had been written in love, not as a warning but as a choice. Keanu read the words, then slowly folded the paper again and slipped it back into his coat. He would go on the show, but he would go on his terms. Morning arrived with a stillness that carried weight. Keanu stood in his kitchen, pouring hot water over a mug of tea, watching the steam rise in delicate spirals. He had sent his reply just after midnight, short and sincere. Thank you for the invitation. I'd be honored to join. He hadn't second-guessed it, not once. But beneath that peace was a readiness. He knew what Victor Langston was capable of. He'd heard the stories, watched a few clips. The show wasn't a conversation. It was a performance. The stage was Victor's kingdom, and guests were often cast as fools, punchlines, or cautionary tales. But what if someone refused to be any of those? That was the thought that kept coming back to Keanu. What if he didn't retaliate, didn't shut down, didn't flinch, but simply held steady? Would the audience notice? Would they feel something different? He wasn't seeking revenge. That wasn't his way. But he did believe in something bigger. That vulnerability didn't need to be a weapon, that you could disarm cruelty with integrity. Later that day, as he stepped out of his house and headed to a quiet lunch with a friend, his phone buzzed again. Text messages from people who had caught wind of the upcoming appearance. One said, "Langston's going to try and break you. Don't let him." Another joked, "Can I send you a suit of armor?" He chuckled softly. The concern touched him more than the humor. At lunch, over quiet conversation, his friend leaned in and said, "You really think kindness can win against a guy like that?" Keanu paused, stirring his drink slowly before answering. "I think the world's seen enough shouting. I think it needs someone who stays grounded even when others try to shake the earth under them." His friend didn't reply right away, then finally said, "Well, if anyone can do it, it's you." The rest of the day passed without noise. Keanu returned home, unplugged from the world, and reread the simple email once more. The words hadn't changed, but he had. Not because he wanted the spotlight, but because he believed that stepping into discomfort sometimes led to clarity. As evening fell, Keanu walked through his garden again, this time letting his hand trail gently across the tops of the flowers. He didn't feel nervous, not yet. What he felt was something else entirely. Resolve. Whatever waited on that stage, he would face it without pretense, without armor, just himself. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The day of the show arrived with a strange mix of anticipation and stillness. Keanu Reeves woke early, long before the sun crept across his windowpane. He didn't touch his phone. He didn't scroll through social media or check the news. Instead, he moved through his morning ritual with quiet intention. Meditation, a slow walk through the garden. He wanted to arrive centered, grounded, because the moment he stepped into that studio, he knew the atmosphere would be anything but calm. By late afternoon, his car pulled into the private lot behind the studio where the Victor Langston show was filmed. The building was plain from the outside, just another structure tucked between sound stages and city streets. But Keanu had walked into enough rooms over the years to feel when something was off. Before the first word was spoken, a studio assistant, no older than 22, greeted him nervously at the door. She wore a headset and carried a clipboard that looked too heavy for her small hands. Her smile wavered the moment she made eye contact with him. "Mr. Reeves," she said, voice barely audible, "we're so honored to have you." He returned her smile gently. "Thank you, and please, just Keanu." She nodded quickly and motioned for him to follow. The hallway was long and brightly lit, but somehow it still felt dim. Crew members passed by with armfuls of cables and lighting rigs, each wearing the same distracted expression. Eyes down, mouths tight, like they all knew something was coming and didn't want to be caught in the crossfire. As they reached the green room, the assistant hesitated before opening the door. "You'll be in here until your segment starts," she said. "Someone will come by to mic you up in about 30 minutes. Keanu glanced at her. She was fidgeting with the edge of her clipboard now. "Is there any advice?" he asked softly. She looked up, startled, then after a pause she sighed. "I probably shouldn't say anything, but—" She lowered her voice. "Just be careful. Victor has a reputation. I mean, I know you've heard the stories, but what people don't realize is it's worse when the cameras are rolling." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "He enjoys watching people squirm. Last month, a guest left in tears. The one before that walked off stage. He always finds something, a moment to twist." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small, creased piece of paper. He unfolded it slowly, revealing a single sentence written in faded ink. "Hold your peace." The assistant saw it and blinked. "Is that a quote?" Keanu smiled quietly. "Something a friend once gave me." The assistant gave a small nod, as if unsure how to respond, then stepped back. "Well, I hope you won't need it," she said. "But if anyone can handle Victor, I think it's you." She left quickly, and Keanu was alone again. The green room was furnished like a hotel lobby. Plush armchairs, a few dim lamps, a tray of untouched fruit and bottled water on a side table. It was meant to feel comfortable, but the silence had a weight to it. It wasn't restful. It was waiting. Keanu sat down and placed the note on the table beside him, his fingers tracing the edge of it absent-mindedly. "Hold your peace." Those words had carried him through more storms than he could count, not by making him passive, but by giving him a center to return to. He'd been through worse than this. He'd faced loss, ridicule, betrayal. But this moment wasn't about pain. It was about pressure. Victor Langston was the kind of man who weaponized discomfort. He created unease and turned it into entertainment. His stage was in a spotlight. It was a test. Keanu leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes. He slowed his breathing, counted to 4. Inhale, hold, exhale, hold again. He didn't want to be reactive. He didn't want to let someone else control the emotional temperature of the room. If anything, he wanted to be the calmest person there. The one who didn't flinch, who didn't run, who didn't strike back. A knock came on the door. This time it was a crew member with a mic and a small receiver pack. "Hey, just here to get you wired up," the tech said, crouching down beside him. He seemed more relaxed than the assistant, but his eyes were tired. "Seen a lot of these shows?" Keanu asked lightly. "Too many," the tech muttered. "Just try not to let it get under your skin, man. He's been itching for someone big to crack. You're his prize tonight." Keanu gave a quiet nod. "Thanks for the heads up." As the tech stood and left, Keanu sat forward and picked up the note again. It wasn't just a reminder. It was a promise to himself. Whatever happened out there, he would not lose who he was. A few minutes later, the assistant reappeared, now wearing a more serious expression. "They're ready for you," she said. Keanu stood, tucked the note back into his jacket, adjusted his collar, and gave her a grateful nod. The hallway to the stage stretched before him like a tunnel. At the far end, the distant roar of the audience filtered through the thick studio doors. He walked toward it, slow, steady steps, not rushing, not hesitating. Whatever waited for him on the other side, he was ready to meet it. Just before reaching the final door, Keanu paused. A producer approached him with a wide, artificial grin and a headset snug behind his ears. "Keanu, great to have you." Victor's excited. Real big numbers tonight. You're going to love it. Keanu nodded politely, looking forward to it. The producer leaned in, his voice dropping. Quick thing, just so you're aware, Victor might go a little off script. You know how he is. But don't worry. It's all part of the show. Nothing personal. Keanu didn't answer right away. He studied the man's expression. There was something behind the words. Not concern, not warning, just expectation. Like they were all waiting to see what he'd do when the fire got hot. The producer patted him on the back and stepped aside. The stagehand by the curtain gave a thumbs up. Keanu could hear the music swell as the band played the show's theme. The applause rolled in like thunder, and Victor's voice boomed from behind the wall. And now, ladies and gentlemen, our next guest is someone you all know and love. He's the star of the hottest movie in America right now. Please welcome Keanu Reeves. The curtain parted, and the light hit him instantly. Bright, almost blinding, but he didn't blink. He stepped forward slowly, emerging onto the stage as the audience exploded into cheers. Some rose to their feet. Others shouted his name. The chant broke out from a few corners of the room. "You're breathtaking." He smiled warmly, fully, without any trace of tension. He raised a hand in appreciation, then walked toward Victor Langston, who stood waiting behind his sleek desk with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. They shook hands. Victor leaned in and said something under his breath, just loud enough for Keanu to hear. "Let's see what you're really made of." Keanu didn't react. He simply nodded, took his seat, and folded his hands in his lap as the music faded and the crowd quieted. Victor turned to the cameras with his signature smirk. "We've got a lot to talk about tonight," he said. Keanu sat still, breathing evenly. The soft pulse of the mic wire pressed against his chest. His jacket was buttoned neatly. Inside, the folded note rested against his heart. "Hold your peace." He could still feel the edges of it, sharp and comforting all at once. Across the desk, Victor Langston launched into his opening monologue, voice rich with charm, jokes flying effortlessly. But Keanu knew what this really was. It wasn't just an interview, it was a test, and he had already made his choice. He would pass it, not by fighting back, not by raising his voice, but by standing still, unshaken. The applause hadn't stopped since Keanu stepped into the light. It rolled across the studio like a wave, loud and rising, filled with admiration that couldn't be faked. Keanu smiled softly, giving a small bow to the audience, then a nod to the band. His body moved with calm precision. No rush, no theatrics, just presence. He walked across the stage and extended his hand to Victor Langston, who stood waiting with a grin too practiced to be genuine. They shook, and Keanu held the contact just long enough to acknowledge it. Then he sat. Victor slid into his seat behind the desk, leaning back casually with a gleam in his eyes. He let the cheers continue for a few more seconds before raising a hand to quiet the crowd. "Well, well, well," Victor said. "Look who's finally decided to grace our stage." Keanu chuckled softly. "It's good to be here. You've got fans chanting your name in the streets, critics throwing awards at you, and somehow you still find time to show up to my humble corner of chaos. I've got to say, I'm flattered. I appreciate the invite," Keanu replied simply. Victor leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "So let's start with the obvious," he said. "Your new film is blowing up. Big stunts, bigger emotions. What's it feel like to still be breaking box office records after all these years?" Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "It's humbling," he said. "Every time a project connects with people, it reminds me why I keep doing this. It's never about chasing numbers. It's about stories and the hope they carry." The audience responded with gentle applause. Victor gave a mock gasp. "Look at that. Mr. Reeves already too wholesome for this show. I was hoping for explosions and maybe a few tears, but you're giving me gratitude and wisdom. Where's the Hollywood diva I was promised?" The crowd laughed, and so did Keanu. He leaned back in his chair, relaxed. "You'll have to settle for quiet appreciation," he said. Victor smiled, but there was a tightness behind it now. He flipped through his note cards, well aware of the shift in tone. Well,